Okay, so we have a second round of follow-up questions here. Wouldn't you agree that there's a problem at government level in terms of hunger for surveillance, and if chips did have a sudden breakthrough in terms of power harvesting or energy storage that you talked about in part one, then governments would naturally try to use that for nefarious ends as they have other technologies. It seems that if we use our phones, etc., as an example, then we can easily come to a conclusion that the natural progressions will be for this to be the next step in development of surveillance. Um, well, there's kind of two parts there that we can unpack. First is there's a common thought process that is that makes a leap, a cognitive leap, that is actually a chasm when people just think about they're crossing over a puddle or just a small line. But I would have to say the analogy would be similar to saying, well, guns are dangerous, but relatively safe, and we can contain them. But what if a gun could be made that shot nuclear weapons, right? Like that would be bad. So we should like deal with a gun in a different way, or like consider all possible futures um, before embracing a particular technology. Or to even make it more simple, fire. We shouldn't light a match because it could burn the world down. It's orders of magnitude more complex and orders of magnitude more, I guess, just different. It's a different question altogether. It would be like saying we shouldn't bother with horses because eventually cars will come, and that will pollute the world. So horses are bad. It's just it's a jump. It's a huge leap to say like we shouldn't embrace technology A because that could lead to technology B, and that could be bad. Um, to say there's some kind of breakthrough in terms of power harvesting or energy or storage, or like the way methodology that these work, like going from a passive device that's inductively powered and communicates inductively over short range magnetic fields to suddenly now there's a new kind of development and then a new kind of chip that says that has a battery and can be hacked by the government, or like transmits long range and could be used for surveillance or whatever. It's two completely different technologies. So I would say I'm not doing well with my analogies today, but I would say it's apples and oranges. So to say that there's a concern that in the future the government could use some means of implant to track you. Sure, like medical devices do that today. Insulin pumps, pacemakers. Uh, Manufacturers have been putting wireless telemetry into those devices when they didn't have any such thing before. They were actually inductively communicated with at very short, close range magnetic field. And now they're putting these Bluetooth and other types of open analog, unsecured wireless, broadcast wireless technologies into these medical devices. And those are exactly what you're describing. They're a battery powered device that's accessible remotely and can be, detected and communicated with over longer ranges. Um, so sure, if you had some methodology of listening for that device and monitoring an area. I mean, my point here is that it's a fundamentally different device, and there's not going to be any kind of technological development down the road that suddenly changes the chip that you have into one of those things. That's a hardware replacement. So if you're not comfortable with that, then you can stick with your passive inductively powered device. And then there's the other aspect of depending on functionality and what you're talking about, surveillance might be moot, right? Like every corner might have a surveillance camera, a CCTV that's tied into facial recognition, and all those feeds go to the government somehow. I mean, it might be, that every cell phone on the planet is hacked, and it's probably already the case. Locating somebody via cell signal, and when are you not with your phone? These devices have become so integrated in our daily lives the thought of operating in modern society without a cell phone is kind of like not an option. So um, it's just one of those things that has to be treaded into carefully by the end user, and you take potential risks with potential benefits, and you make your choice, like just like everybody does. But the bottom line is today, with the devices that we have, VivoKey in particular, those devices are, I would say a net gain to privacy and security because it's not like a storage device. A VivoKey is a cryptographic smart card. It's a smart token that does cryptography in vivo, and you can never forget it, never lose it. It's enabling you to secure your communications in a way that you couldn't if you tried to use Signal or Wicker or any of these secure messaging platforms if your phone is compromised. If your phone is compromised, um, or your computer if you're using that, then those keys that do all that they're compromised too. And then you can capture the traffic not just on the device, the analog unencrypted traffic that you have to look at with your eyeballs, because your brain doesn't understand cryptography. Um, you know that's a huge thing. But at least if you had your private keys inside of VivoKey, then you could toss that thing, get a burner, and get right back to encrypted secure communication without putting the key on the phone. The key remains here and the cryptography is done here. It's not just, you put the phone on it and then the key gets sent to the phone. The phone does the work of encrypting and decrypting. No, the encryption and decryption, signing, verification, all that happens in VivoKey. So that means you can pick up anybody's phone, use it with VivoKey to generate OTP codes to log into websites, or unencrypt your email or unencrypt your communications and encrypt what you send. I mean, all these things are totally possible to do with VivoKey in a way that takes the private keys, the really important sensitive bits, away from these general computing platforms like a phone or a computer that could easily be infiltrated. So it's kind of I would say, an important net gain to personal privacy, and actually battling the idea of government surveillance with an implant. So, do you foresee a world where advertisers and governments are tracking people thanks to chipping technology? This is the argument I'm being drilled with from the other side. I've already somewhat formed an opinion that even if chips can be used by evil governments, then this is very much like VPN being able to be used by a criminal. Um, okay, well, advertisers and governments tracking people with chipping technology. Again, this is just goofy, uh, ridiculous, magical thinking that somehow it's man, I'm really failing on the analogies today, but the reality is that to be able to do that, to make effective, cost-effective, and efficient and practical use of a chip implant to track somebody and serve them an ad or get their whereabouts, um, it just doesn't exist. I mean, you wouldn't pay. There's not enough money in the world, literally, to pay to build the equipment necessary to cover all the geographic area that you would need to cover in order to track somebody with a chip like this. It's just ridiculous. It's, uh, I mean, cameras and regular old radio receivers that listen to your cell phone, IMI or whatever, it's talking to the cell network. Even the cell towers that you're talking to can triangulate your position. I mean, I used to be involved in some mobile technology that would do that for location-based services. That is fundamentally the way that you interact with any kind of technology. If you drive your car through an area, you might not your face might not be visible, but your car's license plate is, and you know that thing is tracked. And you got these um, cars now that are like Bluetooth enabled, so they're broadcasting Bluetooth, MAC addresses that are unique identifiers, and there's so many ways and more efficient, practical, and cost-effective ways to uh, track somebody down, that the idea of going through the development and manufacturing and deployment of readers that would have to be very closely spaced in order to get any kind of information, and the cost to develop this huge antenna structure that would work efficiently and effectively when somebody was even a few feet away, um, it just doesn't make sense. So again, like I said, technically it would be possible, but completely and wholly impractical um, to do anything like that. As far as like using chips Can be used by evil governments, and this is very much like VPN being able to be used by a criminal. I'm not exactly sure what that part of the question means, to be honest. It's to say, I would say those are two different things. Um, I would say that something like VivoKey uh, has a potential to be used by, it's a tool, it's an encryption tool. It could be used by millions of people for legitimate business and personal use purposes and protecting their privacy and all that. But any privacy tool, any kind of anything, including a wall in your house, can be used to hide criminal activity from the public. It's, um, you know, as far as an evil government using it, um, sure. If they're breaking laws, they're criminals, and if they're using technology against you, then I think we're just kind of diving into semantics at this point, but you get it. So VPN as a tool can be used for good to retain privacy, especially important, blah, 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 with a crack vulnerability, and US ISPs being allowed to sell web browsing histories, yeah, and for bad by criminals. Yeah, the VPN is not good or bad in the same way the kitchen knife isn't good or bad. Yeah, that's correct. It's a technology, it's a tool. How you use it uh, means it's good or bad. But I think probably what I would want to touch on, that's a little bit off topic, but it's the tendency for human beings to dumb down and simplify everything to binary yes, no, good, bad kind of answers. Like coffee, is it good for you or bad for you? Well, it's both. It's both. There's certain benefits and there's pros and cons. A pros and cons list, anytime anybody says, is it good or bad? I have to say, don't ask me that. Ask me what are the pros and cons, because there is hardly anything in the world that is good or bad. And if there are such things, they're not either. They simply are. And we attest, we assign a good or a bad value to that. But um, outcomes can be good or bad. Effects can be good or bad. But like just with coffee, there are effects that are good and effects that are bad. And it depends on what you're talking about. As a whole system, you'd have to weigh the pros and cons and then decide whether or not it was worth it. And are you drinking 50 gallons of it? Or are you drinking a little espresso or whatever? So it's, yeah, the idea of assigning a binary good or bad value to anything is kind of like ridiculous. Um, from where I'm standing, if the government tracking started happening with chips, it would have to be very obvious and precise method of doing so rather than some covert means that no one realized what was going on. This would be a government problem as opposed to a chip problem. Would you agree with that? Or is there even an outside possibility for secret spy chips? Um, no, there is no ability for secret spy chips to spy anything, except for the one type of spy, tool. Anything that's radio, whether it be passive, magnetically coupled RF ID systems or broadcasts like EM field broadcasters, transponders, or transceivers, there is something that's not naturally occurring in the environment that is going out and it's detectable. It's always going to be detectable. So the only thing that isn't really easily detectable is cameras, because light is everywhere. It's normal and natural to have light in your immediate area. So that light hits you and bounces off, and a little bit of it goes into a camera. You would never know. That's really the risk. And the problem with that is that it's not a camera is a completely passive device, but it can be hugely powerful. I mean, even the new iPhones now have single monocular, single camera, not two, just one. And I think Samsung's probably working on it too, but they can do 3D mapping of an area, three-dimensional understanding of depth with just one camera. And that is very amazing, but also a little bit terrifying, because now surveillance cameras can understand depth and context better than they could before. And so the kind of dystopian future is going to be it's probably here now. It's based on cameras, but the problem with that, and everybody who's kind of up in arms, particularly the spy chips people, the people that have the whole brand spy chips. Um, a camera is not a tangible item that you can point to and say that's the problem, because cameras are everywhere. We kind of accepted that this is just they're everywhere, but I'm safe in my house. Well, you keep seeing these hidden camera problems and people shooting, lenses through windows and whatnot. The point is that an RFID tag has some Hollywood um, movie kind of ambiance where it's always coming back to there's a tracking capability. I even watched a TV show the other day, just a regular old sitcom, and there was a joke in there about, you know, a wife having a tracking chip in her husband, but it wasn't a joke in the show. It was real in the show. The show was like, "Oh, where's my husband?" And she looked him up on her phone. Oh, son of a bitch, and go get him or what? And I'm like, if it's in a sitcom, this is where we're at with public education on what chips are. Of course, there's going to be money coming from people who have concerns but not a lot of intelligent knowledge about the subject, going to organizations like Spy Chips about this tangible evil item that we can point to and say, this is the problem. If we get rid of this thing, we're not going to be, slaves to the government or whatever. Give us money to help fight the bad, evil thing, object. But if you're like, cameras are bad, well, that's like saying oxygen is bad. Cameras aren't going away. They're not going away anytime soon, or ever. They're just never going away. So, um, people kind of like, well, surveillance cameras, whatever, it's for security. They kind of rationalize it, but the reality is the huge, massive, undeniable threat to personal privacy, which is the primary reason that it's gone, by the way. Like there is no privacy. There's only vain attempts at maintaining it, is cameras and the computer systems and the AI systems and cross, data flows that feed all these different feeds together and do, cross town, cross city, cross globe analysis of people and the way they move and their faces and everything. That's already a done deal, right? So concern over an implant or what it might become in the future is just moot. It's just noise, and it's irrelevant. Um, you know, you got a cell phone that literally takes GPS signals, calculates your location, and sends that off to a number of apps that you've like blindly just hit agree to, and then they take that, sell it. Who knows? I'm sure that Apple just got in trouble a few years ago for just having a log of everywhere you've been, GPS coordinates in a log. Who knows what they were doing with it, but it was just logging all the time. And somebody found it through a jailbroken phone, and it's like, "What is this?" And the Apple's like, "Ooh, whoops, sorry, we'll turn that off." So this concern about chips and tracking and everything, what you should be focused on, bottom line, is how implant technology can be used to improve your privacy and improve your security. Bottom line, that's all that should be talked about at this point, because the reality is anything you have, like a token, little thing that you plug in, security token, anything, that can be taken from you, that can be legally put into evidence, and you can be, legally made to use that. But the line is a little more gray when it comes to can the government legally perform surgery on you and remove a thing? And there's a lot of case law about bullet wounds and where the bullet was still inside and the police wanted it, and the doctors were like, well, it's not, the risk isn't worth the potential case value, blah blah blah. So there's there's a conversation to be had there, but by and large, technologies like VivoKey, those are all about improving your privacy and security. So this whole idea of tracking or governments using it against you in some way, I mean, you got to think about it. You got to think about it the same way kind of the American NRA type people think about it. It's there for use against the government, or whatever it is they believe. But I mean, the general consensus is that Second Amendment is about the people having guns so that the government can't come and just steamroll you. But I look at VivoKey the same way. That's how I want to secure my digital life, is with something that's always with me. It's literally a part of me, but it's not something you could just leave a fingerprint somewhere, or look into a camera and give up your iris scan. So yeah, that's kind of a long rambling way around it, but that's how I feel about this whole like tracking discussion around chips. It's just ridiculous. Um, so let's see. There is a call for athletes to be fitted with microchips to help against drug cheating. Oh, right. Okay. So um, you can see he's basically saying the technology was there. If the technology was there, he would be interested in using it. How it seems like you're saying the technology isn't there. Um, yeah. So um, the idea behind making athletes get an implant to track potential drug markers over time, not just spot checking before an event or something. Um, these are, you know, philosophical questions, I guess, that have to be worked out. And I have a feeling that a lot of people will be less sympathetic about ensuring that an athlete can't cheat, and the whole question of whether or not to get an implant to do that check or not. But I kind of equate it to, uh, I mean, there's an argument to be made about mandatory drug checks, through blood testing or urine testing. And in those cases, there's seemingly no guarantee from the company that you're working for or the testing company that's doing the testing that that information won't be used beyond the scope of a simple drug test. They could be taking cells and doing DNA analysis. They could be doing cultures for other things. They could be testing for other substances or other medical conditions to then discriminate against you with blood glucose and whatnot. I mean, there could be just a plethora of things going on, but nobody bats an eye about mandatory drug testing. But when it comes to implants or something like that, there's this sense that the skin is some kind of sacred barrier, and that something going under the skin is spiritually and fundamentally different than like anything else. And I kind of on a functional level, I agree. It is fundamentally different than carrying a cell phone or carrying a security token. Having a token with me is fundamentally different, and there's many reasons for that. But when it comes to a concern about other people's or companies or governments' right to your body, or right to demand certain things of your body, we have that already, and it's not really talked about. I guess the closest thing would be, um, I would say, mandatory blood testing for DUI. So in many states, if you get pulled over, you do the breathalyzer, but if you refuse to do the breathalyzer, they will take you to the station, and a non-medical, like not a nurse or a doctor, but a police officer with training, but still, it's not a medical personnel, will forcibly, take your blood by force. They can compel you to do that. There's no option to opt out. And even if you have, there's certain religious groups that, they don't want needles, they don't want drug vaccines, nothing. The body's a sacred temple kind of thing. And even that, they cannot refuse based on their religion. It's compulsory, and they're taking blood from your body. And that. If you're concerned about implants, being required for sports players to participate in the sporting event or the business of sports, then you should be equally outraged or concerned about things like mandatory blood testing from police. It's there really isn't too much of a difference in my mind. So, I would love to have further conversations about this, but I mean that's about all the further I can go at this point about it. Um, okay, so what do you say to people that feel that this first stage of implantation has been used to desensitize people to the notion of chipping? Surely the idea of having mandated chips for athletes, if it is ever possible, goes too far. Would you agree that chipping should always be voluntary, not mandatory? Do you think there will ever be a time when criminals, refugees, immigrants, or any other minority might be forced to get implanted? Are there cases of this to your knowledge? Should this be opposed at all costs? Um, this, this kind of touches on the same thing that I was just talking about. Um, some people feel that this first stage of implantation is being used to desensitize people to the notion of chipping. Again, this is some kind of bizarre conspiracy theory line of thinking from nut jobs. I mean, this is either they're nut jobs or they have a financial interest in fighting the good fight against RFID, whether it be selling crap on their radio shows or selling books or whatever. Um, but that whole question just it seems to indicate the idea that that there's some nefarious plan, and this first round of chipping is being used, like as part of the plan to desensitize people. People get desensitized through simple exposure, right? In marketing, it's been known for 50 plus years. The exposure effect is just that. That's why you see the same ad 50 times to the point you get annoyed by seeing the ad all the time. But they're trying to leverage the exposure effect, which is ape brain, you know, construction where the more we're familiarized with something, the less intimidating it seems, the more familiar it seems, and the less kind of immediate negative reaction we'll have to it because we fear the unknown. That's a built-in cognitive process. It's unknown, so it's scary. So we better go with what's safe and known. And by simply being exposed to an idea or a thing over and over and over, we get a sense of familiarity. We get a sense that it's known, and that opens us up to thinking more logically and consciously about that thing. So that's why you see even when I did this in 2005, mostly people's reaction was very visceral and negative. But now in 2017, I can tell somebody that swears up and down that they've never heard of such a thing, that I have a chip implant, and I've been in the media for over a decade in one way or another talking about this. So they have been exposed to the idea. Maybe it didn't sink in, but they have been exposed at least a few times. And so the general reaction today is, oh, that's kind of weird. Good for you. I mean, I don't want to do it, but good for you. So much more benign, much more logical and rational reaction. And even if they don't want to do it, that's fine. But it's not a visceral, violent reaction. And that's through simple exposure to the idea. And so, and the fact that like I got it over a decade ago and I'm still alive. So, just there's certain knowns with even just having it be around for so long. Um, so again, surely the idea of having mandatory chips for athletes goes too far. Would you say that it should always be mandatory or always be voluntary, not mandatory? Um, I mean, the easy answer is, of course, it should always be voluntary. There should always be an alternative. Um, but I think human nature ultimately will make it pseudo-mandatory, meaning the idea that, let's say that an implant technology comes along that is a cognitive enhancement. It makes your brain super awesome and connects it to supercomputers, and we can communicate with our thoughts, and we have AI that's enhancing our cognition, and we live with half of our brain processing power, connected to supercomputers, and like this is a far future, but I mean not too far. It could easily be 50 years away. Um, and so when you come to a society like that, it might not be mandatory that you do this, but I think there's going to be a lot of cases where it becomes pseudo-mandatory, and probably in a few cases where it actually is mandatory. So an example would be to be a firefighter, you have to have legs. Um, that's a simple mandatory requirement. You have to pass certain tests. You have to pass certain performance tests. You have to be able to carry a hose up and down ladders, and you have to be able to do all these physical things to be able to be a firefighter because that's what the job requires. And I think there's going to be a future where certain jobs, anyway, will have just flat out mandates. You have to have, brain augment, chip that allows Protocol 5 at least level 2 to be able to participate with the company's brain tree. It's just like saying you need to have, word processor experience today. Um, or a car. If you're applying for a pizza delivery position, you need a car. You're not going to walk the pizzas around town. So there are already all these examples of mandatory requirements to apply for certain jobs. And I think as these implant technologies become much more capable and commonplace, um, there will be certain mandates just put on because of performance requirements. And the thing that's going to push, I think, additional pressure on human beings becoming augmented in that way is going to be AI. For computer or AI to become better and better and better at what it does to kind of compete even with each other and with AI, in that kind of environment, you're gonna need an augment of some kind. Maybe not cognitive. Maybe firefighters of the future are gonna have super legs and giant whatevers. Who knows? But my point is that today we can talk about making everything voluntary, and there's certain states have already passed laws that make it illegal for companies to mandate employees get an implant. And I agree that's a good start. But the reality is technology and human endeavor and human requirements for better, more efficient, um, uh, you know, employment and work and just existence. We always want better. Um, is going to push this idea of mandated augments, outlawing mandation or making augments mandatory is just going to be it's going to be moot eventually. Maybe not in the next 10, 20, 30 years, but definitely. I mean, it's just how human progress works. Um, it's our kind of prerogative to do that. So, um, do you think there will ever be a time when criminals, refugees, immigrants, or any other minority be forced to get implanted? Potentially. I'm sure that um, I mean, Verichip tried to do that with the U.S. government and immigrants in 2003. They tried to say, hey, this is great. You can give every immigrant a chip implant, and then we can identify them accurately, And they tried to do it in prisons, like give every prisoner a chip implant, and then we can identify them accurately, and they can then move around freely in the prison, and um, or within their controlled environments, and have the implant to be able to identify them properly. And they're just, it was a company that was searching for a market for their product because their idea of doing the health records kind of fell flat. So, um, but eventually there will be some sort of thing. I mean, there's already been um, suggestions from certain governors about this, and their whole understanding of what a chip implant was capable of was completely based on, again, Hollywood movies, and they thought, oh, we could track criminals around anywhere they are. It's a replacement for the ankle bracelet. It'll be small and put it in, and we can know if they're home for house arrest or whatever. And 2 seconds of saying it doesn't work like that, they're like, oh, okay, well. But again, if this becomes a possibility, people are going to want to explore those types of applications. Of course, they're just going to want to. So it all comes down to it's somebody in a position of authority going to propose the thing, and are the people of that society going to accept the thing? That's just how it works. So I would imagine somewhere in the world there will be a group of people that are going to try that at some point in the next 50 years. Um, so the ultimate question here is, you may have heard of Canada's carrot reward scheme. To me, any kind of social reward system rings alarm bells. Carrot rewards doesn't seem a million miles away from China's sesame points. I think there's concern that social reward systems and shipping tech could one day meet and create a dystopian type future. Do you acknowledge that this is a possibility? Do you see why my mind is flirting with natural progression? We see two separate things slowly developing simultaneously. Yeah, China's Sesame Points is a flat out government mandated ranking system for people. It has nothing to do with implants, and to be honest, it has nothing to do with chips. I mean, the reality is that they were like, we need a form of social control that makes society reinforce it rather than us having to do the work of enforcing it, because that just never doesn't work. Top down doesn't work. But if you can literally make the population do a grassroots effort to oppress themselves, kind of like um, certain political parties here in the States have successfully done, um, then you don't have to do the work, and it's naturally self-serving, and Sesame Points does that perfectly. You say good things about the government, and your friends like that, and your friends make comments. Essentially, the brilliance of the system, and it is brilliant. It's evil, but it's evil genius. Um, it's not that you gain Sesame points and then that gets you better access to jobs and credit and banking and whatever. That's a given. But what's brilliant about it, and what makes it self-serving and kind of cyclical, is that it it has this level of recursion. So if you if you are friends with somebody who's talking badly about the government and they have a low score, just being friends with them, associating with them, lowers your score. So you will automatically, people that have any kind of critical thought about the government or whatever will automatically be ostracized. Just that's the evil genius behind the Sesame Point system. Um, but that's still kind of miles away from the carrot rewards thing. Carrot rewards is interesting, but it's a private company. It's not the government, as far as I know. It's not the Canadian government. And those rewards, the carrot reward system is very much like a loyalty card system at any grocery store, or a loyalty points card that is good across multiple stores. There's several of those that exist. 5 Star is one of them, for example. You can get a card, and then member retailers or vendors can join that system, and then you can get these points or credits across multiple member retailers. So, but it's all voluntary. You jump in. It's just like you can opt to not get the loyalty card at the store and just pay the full price. But even in that scenario, like many stores, if you don't have the card, the checker will just use their own card and go beep and give you the same good pricing. So they kind of recognize that it's kind of a moot point to try to force people to get these cards. But I'd say the tipping point would be when those socially rewarded points tip into politics, then that's pretty, and that the accumulation of those points has more to do than just saving a few pennies off a can of beans. It's like, can you get access to? Essentially, it would be like if you tied it directly into your credit score, right? Like just like Sesame Points have done in China. So that's where it starts to become very kind of scary and crazy. And the reality is, it has nothing to do with um, like microchip implants. There would be there would be nothing like. In fact, I could envision a future where those kinds of things would be leveraged against microchip users. For example, just the same way it's leveraged against VPN users in China. China wants to control access to certain things on the internet. They want to kind of have the Great Wall of internet, there. And so if you're using a VPN to get around that, to secure your stuff and keep your stuff private, the government doesn't like that. It's illegal. And so, like, just in the same way, I could see, people that have a chip implant that secure their data, with VivoKey, for example, on their mobile phone, or they secure their communications that way. Um, that would be again going against the very thing that they're trying to do. So I would see like a carrot reward system or some kind of evil system like that actually ding people for using encryption, for ding them for using encrypted communications. Yeah, so it's the idea that somehow, some way, people just want to build that bridge, but the way I see it is exactly the opposite, actually. Um, so let's see here. What's the next one? All of those words have negative connotations. Um, so yeah, this is about the name of the company, Dangerous Things. Um, so Dangerous Things, when I put this in 2005, um, it was like nobody had really done it. There was Professor Work in Reading in the UK. He had done a Cyborg 1.0 project. He put a transponder in his arm for like 2 weeks, I think, and did a bunch of proof of concept experiments. It was really awesome, and he took it out. Verichip, of course, they were trying to sell their thing, which is like a chip implant that goes in the tricep. Same concept, but their thing was like it goes in and never comes out. They had parylene biobond coating, and it goes into the muscle, and it's very difficult to remove. And like I would didn't want to do that either. So I think in terms of what I'd done, putting it here so it's accessible, it's easily placed up to a reader, it's easily removed, it's easily replaced, all those things. Um, in 2005, the general consensus was that's dangerous. What you're doing is crazy. You're dangerous, whatever. So when the maker revolution really started getting underway, and people started building hobbyist electronics in their homes and garages and things again, the whole idea of um, building projects that use RFID became prevalent again and popular. And so I started getting a ton of email and everything. But these are from people that are like really enthusiastic about the technology, particularly building their own solutions. And when you build your own stuff and you know exactly what goes in it, there's no unknown. So of course it makes sense. Just like I felt in in putting this in my hand originally, I understood the technology, so there's no unknowns for me, so there's no fear about it. So yeah, sure, do it. So, but the whole idea about building a business model around this and helping people get safe installations with safe equipment and safe stuff, um, I thought, what am I going to call this? And the idea was, I could call it super safe things, but I realized that the concept um, the very idea of putting a transponder in was so kind of leading edge or literally bleeding edge technology that the name would be irrelevant. I could call it super awesome safe things, or I could call it dangerous things, kind of as a tongue-in-cheek ha-ha at all the grandmas out there that were freaking out. And it would, the same people would be interested. So I just said, hey, I'm going to call it dangerous things because that's fun. And then, we started partnering with professional body modders and piercers to do the installations because they're very familiar with safe aseptic procedure and licensed studios. And so the name Dangerous Things just kind of fit with that kind of body mod, edgy kind of crowd anyway. So it was just kind of perpetuating this kind of like cool hip biohacker body mod thing, and where we're still very much in that space of working with biohackers, working with people that are pushing the envelope a little bit. But as time progresses and society moves on and like starts looking at legitimate like real solving real problems with this technology like VivoKey, solving the problem of digital identity and how do we actually secure our digital identities and encrypt and secure and ensure our privacy. The name VivoKey makes more sense because that's what it is. It's literally the key to your digital life in vivo. So you're building a bridge between your biological identity and your digital identity. And the key there is that it's your identity. It's yours. VivoKey is your thing. Just like when you buy a token, a security token, that's your token. Your keys are on your token. The company you bought the token from doesn't have your keys. It's your tool to keep yourself secure online and even in your regular mobile environment, desktop, whatever. So by the same token, that's the whole concept of VivoKey is to kind of open up this more legitimate, general public, mass market kind of concept where we're talking about just everyday users having a benefit rather than kind of like, edgy biohackery types. So that's the last question. So I hope that's good.